My name's Martin Sugarman. I'm the archivist of the Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen and Women and helped to found our museum. And my talk today is connected to a very momentous event in Jewish history, which happened not very far from here. And there are links, of course, with Hackney, which is why I'm here. In 1917, after 3 years of lobbying by both British Jewish community and its many friends in the wider community, the British government agreed to the raising of a specifically Jewish unit to fight in the British Army in World War I against the Ottomans in Israel. It was a momentous and iconic moment in Jewish history, as it would be only the second time since the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the loss of Jewish statehood that an independent Jewish fighting unit had been formed with its own banner and its own cap badge, the famous menorah badge, which I'll show you later. But it was also the very first time that a regiment, I quote from the Jewish Chronicle, consisting exclusively of Jews, will have tramped the streets of England, for history is being made in these days. The unit was to be part of the Royal Fusiliers, a very old British regiment, and were given the battalion numbers 38th, 39th and 40th, with the 41st and 42nd battalions in training reserves. The whole force became known as the Jewish Legion, or the First Judeans. The Guardian newspaper alluded to them as the New Maccabeans, hence the title of the talk. To the Jewish community, they were nicknamed the Royal Fusiliers, also the King's Own Schneiders, because most of them were tailors by profession. And that name quickly attached itself to this astonishing group of volunteer fighters. There was a quip made about their motto, which was to be no advance without security. That's apocryphal, of course. Many famous Jews joined this regiment, including the sculptor Jacob Epstein, who was in the 38th Battalion, the London group, but he didn't in fact go abroad because he fell ill and had to be demobilized. But most of the 38th Battalion came from the East End of London, from the ghetto of Whitechapel, but quite a few also from Hackney. And hence my presence here at this meeting. Vladimir Jabotinsky, who the British called Captain Jabberwocky because they couldn't pronounce his name, was an honorary officer in the 38th Battalion. He was a very famous founder of the Zionist movement. The 39th Battalion came mainly from America, from Canada and Argentina, and the 40th Battalion were mostly Israeli refugees from the Ottoman Turkish occupation who had fled south when the Ottoman Turks realized that the Jewish units were siding with the Allies and not with the Central Powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary. There are quite a few books written about the Legion, quite a lot in Hebrew, of course, in Israel, but quite a few in English, and other books about the First World War mention the battalions quite frequently. In a moment, I'll give you a little bit of a breakdown about where they served. But I have got to leave quite a lot out. And let me say at this moment, if you want to read the full article, Google on the title of the talk or on the title of the March of the Jewish Legion through Whitechapel. And the whole talk will come up. It's been published on a number of platforms, but you don't see the images. And that's what I want to focus on today. The Times newspaper described how half of the 38th Battalion, consisting of 4 companies, totaling nearly 500 men and officers, were ordered to come to London by General Macready, who was the Adjutant General of the British Armed Forces, from their training camp in Plymouth at a place called Egg Buckland. You can go and visit Egg Buckland. The barracks are still there. They're derelict. But that's where they trained. And they were to march through the streets amid scenes of wild enthusiasm, and along the whole route The sturdy physique and martial bearing of these men was commented by the press of the day. The description of the march is not mentioned in any textbooks. All of the information I discovered about them from the research, which I was asked to do first of all by the Jewish East End Celebration Society, but was later published by the Western Front Association, is in newspapers. There is no record, even in the textbooks, it just mentions a march. The details of the march are only from the press. So I looked at all the national press, plus of course the Jewish Chronicle and the Jewish World newspapers, and there was quite a lot about the march that featured in these articles. There were lots of quotes from the Daily Mail, from the Times, from the Daily Telegraph, how London's ghetto, the refuge of generations of oppressed Jews, rocked with martial pride and the homage of the people, from among whom the bulk of the battalion were in fact recruited. The commander of the battalion was Colonel John Patterson, DSO, the fiery, Judeophile Irish Protestant who was born near Dublin and who commanded the 38th Battalion. He'd previously commanded the Zion Mule Corps at Gallipoli. My paper on the Zion Mule Corps is also online, and that's like a prequel to this story. The two are linked because when the Zion Mule Corps were eventually evacuated with Allied forces from Gallipoli, most of them went to London, and they joined a London battalion of the London Regiment. Hackney was one, for example. Most boroughs had a battalion of the London Regiment. And they went from there into the Jewish Legion. So they were volunteers of two campaigns. At 10 a.m. on the day of February the 4th, 1918, at about that time in the morning, says the Daily Mail, it varies in different newspapers, after an early morning inspection, the battalion emerged from the Tower of London, where they'd been billeted for the night, in columns of 4 abreast, with their Zionist flags and their Union Jacks held high aloft, headed by the band of the Coldstream Guards, who were over 60 bandsmen. It was quite a compliment. They were greeted with much cheering, repeated as they made their way in inclement weather via the Minories to Aldgate. On a personal note, my grandparents lived in the Minories at number 81, where Tower Gateway Station is. And I always regret not asking them, because they were long dead, did they witness this event? Because, as I say, there's very little about it in the textbooks, but they probably did. As they marched up towards Aldgate, Jabotinsky led them with a Jewish banner at the head of the battalion, and he described in his own book how tens of thousands of people lined the streets with the blue and white flags, what we would now call the Israeli flag, hanging from shops and windows all along the route. Many people were uttering the Shechachayenu, which is a famous prayer thanking God for being alive to reach this season. Patterson on his horse was laughing and bowing to the crowd and wearing a rose which a girl had thrown at him, he said, from the balcony. And the soldiers marched with their bayonets on their rifles proudly through the streets. Word about that, soldiers are only allowed to march through a city with fixed bayonets if they have the permission of the fathers of the town or city. This is a medieval custom because in medieval times, when an army was camped outside a city, your own army, you couldn't really be trustworthy that they were going to behave themselves. So they weren't allowed to march with swords, in this case, or bayonets. So if a regiment is given permission to fix bayonets and march through a city to fix bayonets, it's considered to be a great honour. And that is what happened. There are lots of photographs, and I managed to find some of these in the press at the time by looking at the records, which were then at the Colindale Library. They're now in the British Library, the press microfilms of the day. And they marched along from Aldgate westward towards the Mansion House through Lombard Street. And at Mansion House, the Lord Mayor of London took the salute, and they wheeled around very cleverly and goes on back towards up towards the East End, past Aldgate, where the bus station is now, where the 254 bus starts, and then on down towards the towards the direction of Mile End. The Jewish Chronicle said, "He must be a dull and unimaginative Jew who, without a glow of emotion and pride, could have witnessed London's welcome to the Judeans as they marched through the streets of our metropolis." And so on and so on. There are lots of quotes from the press of that kind. At the Mansion House, and after turning east, they made their way to the Pavilion Theatre in Mile End, the site of which, of course, is still there. And there they were welcomed by the local community, mostly Jewish, of course. In the city, it was local people who were at work. And the Lord Mayor of Sutton and all the various dignitaries and councillors were there to greet them. And the Star newspaper, some of you will remember the Star, which used to compete with the Evening Standard, described how one feature that gave great pleasure to the crowd was the Guards band playing the Hatikva. Now, the Hatikva is now the national anthem of Israel, but it was, long before that, the national anthem of the anthem of the Zionist movement. The Daily Mail described the men as soldierly, spick and span, but it was not until the battalion was in the midst of the crowds with their blue and white flags that the cheering erupted. The battalion was on home soil, and many of the people in the crowd were, of course, parents and relatives of the soldiers who were on parade. There is an apocryphal story, I must tell you. Somebody told me, I think it's apocryphal. An elderly lady turned around and said to a very puckered Englishman standing behind them, "Look at these lovely soldiers, and my son is the only one who's marching in step." I would like to think that's a true story, but I think it's late. There were quite a few characters in the crowd. There was a famous Catholic priest who the Jews called Av HaRochamim, Father of Mercy, who spent a lot of time helping the poor in the Jewish community. He expressed his pleasure at seeing the flags of the Jewish battalion as they marched by and called them the modern Maccabeans. After a short time, the men marched to the south, turning right to Jubilee Street, and then right again into Commercial Road to make their way back to Camperdown House. Now, Camperdown House, the name still exists, but it's been long demolished. Camperdown House was the head office of the Jewish Lads Brigade, and there they were going to have their lunch, and there will be speeches. The building was a purpose-built Jewish youth centre, one of the first in Britain. They had a firing range in the basement because the boys of the Jewish Lads Brigade were part of the Territorial Army. So when you reached 18, you were automatically eligible to be part of the British Army. It was a paramilitary unit, much more than it is today. It's today the Jewish Lads and Girls Brigade. So they went to Camperdown House, and they were drawn up for inspection by Lieutenant General Sir Francis Lloyd, who commanded the London district. And there were loads of crowds again watching them, very necessarily standing to attention. And there were speeches outside, but then they went inside for their lunch. And we even know what they had to eat. They fell out at 1:30 and had a kosher lunch, which consisted of soup, followed by beef pie with vegetables, apple pie, coffee, fruit, and cigarettes, of course. Everybody smoked in those days. Joseph Cowan, a leading Zionist leader, a character, presided in the unavoidable absence of Lord Rothschild, who had suffered a bereavement, and Jabotinsky spoke. The Reverend Solon Litzen, the Jewish chaplain to the forces, spoke to the men and wished them God bless, mazel and bracha, which means luck and blessings to all of you. Then Patterson rose to talk, and there was a huge cheer from the men who absolutely adored him. He stood up and said to the men that he wanted to thank everyone responsible for setting up the Judeans, were true friends of the people of Israel. Their enterprise was long and laborious, but coming forth from this group of men is not a mouse, but the Lion of Judah. He was confident that the members of the regiment would equip themselves well. He knew because he trained them. He was a Boer War veteran and had served in Gallipoli as well. And he described all the officers and men as a band of brothers long before the TV program. He said, "We will fight together, and some of us may die together. But what we do know is that we shall do together, march to victory. I have a fine, hard, disciplined, eager lot of troops. You will give good account of yourselves." The Chief Rabbi Joseph Hertz, who later wrote the British Jury Book of Honour, showing all the Jews from Britain and the Commonwealth who served in the First World War, then gave his benediction to the men. He told soldiers that they held the honour of the Jewish people in their hands. They were worthy successors to the Jewish Maccabees. The response was deafening. He reminded them that in this struggle, British ideals were consistent with those of the Jews, and he quoted the psalm that the guardian of Israel, who slumbers not, neither does he sleep, will have you all in his keeping. God save the King. After the lunch, the troops marched away from Camperdown House after forming up outside with the Coldstream Guards, and they marched all the way to Waterloo. They marched about 8 miles that day. And at Waterloo, they entrained for Southampton, where the rest of the battalions were to meet them, and they were to go across to France. The men carried with them a Sefer Torah from the Ark, where the scrolls are kept in the synagogues, and it was given to them by Captain and Mrs. Israel Fredman, and the Reverend Lipson gave it to the troops before they left. He said, "I give into your keeping this book of the law, to be in all circumstances and all times your never failing guide. In the remote past, the law went forth from Zion, but you should be happy you are taking it back to our sacred land." And as the troops marched away, many religious Jews were lining the route, manifesting their traditional respect for the scrolls which headed the troops on their way. There is a lot more, mostly descriptions of how the march appeared and appealed to all people lining the streets. But there was also some anti-Semitism. Surprise, surprise. Some bile flowed. The East London Observer on 9th February 1980 stated, "The military authorities are to be congratulated on deciding not to give the battalion a distinctive Jewish title and to drop all nonsense about the Star of David. They are simply the Royal Fusiliers." But they got that wrong, because not only did they have their own flag, they had their own badge, the menorah badge, which I'll show you later, and on their shoulders they wore a Star of David. So, the tongue of malice, as the Jewish Chronicle said, is never impossible to restrain. One newspaper wrote, said the JC, the large numbers of the Judeans took advantage of their march in order to desert, and that their behaviour was reprehensible. Both are unmitigated falsehoods. Where have we heard that before? Meanwhile, the editor of the Pall Mall magazine offered the following piece of priceless anti-Semitism. The heavy, high-cheeked, boned countenance of the Russian predominated, though there were a few stubbly, round-faced figures which looked as though they might get into the car key by mistake, their speech betraying the men more than their appearance. It is a curious fact that in spite of their marked linguistic abilities, Jewish people live in England almost all their lives without losing their accent. Make of that what you like. Make it signed or with some truth in it. I don't know. But such was the anti-Semitism that some newspapers had to make some negative comments. And not forgetting, using that description, that at the same time, Britain were recruiting Bantam battalions from the general population. These were mostly very short, stunted growth men from the industrial cities and mines who had previously been turned down for military service. So the description of the Jewish battalion is really no different from what the British government were doing at the time, of recruiting men not necessarily suited to serve, but who did and served very bravely. We should bear in mind how significant a day this was in Jewish history. It is too easy for Jews today who live in Britain, where we enjoy freedoms, in a world where Israel is a strong nation now and well established, to forget how astonishing it must have been at the time for the Jewish people and their non-Jewish neighbours to see such fighting soldiers, remembering that many had fled terrible persecutions in Europe to get to Britain, and to witness a Jewish regiment going off to fight to liberate Eretz Israel, and it all happened a couple of miles from here. The 38th Battalion, how long have we got? Over it. 38th Battalion on its own won 1 DSO, 5 military crosses, 2 of them twice, 1 DCM, 6 military medals, these are all bravery awards, 8 mentioned dispatches, and suffered 1 officer and 31 men killed in the fighting. Among those who served in the Jewish Legion were people who became very famous later in Israel. Yitzhak Ben-Zvi was a sergeant, and he was Israel's second president, I beg your pardon. Yaakov Dori, who founded the Haganah, the recognized Jewish defense force recognized by the British Mandate authorities from 1917 to 1947, also served in the 38th Battalion. I mentioned Jacob Epstein. Levi Eshkol, the third Prime Minister of Israel at the time of the Six-Day War, served in the battalion. Eliyahu Golon, who founded, another founder of the Haganah, and of course David Ben-Gurion. I'll show you his photograph. He served in the 40th Battalion. And many famous philosophers, writers, and artists who later became famous in their own homeland. So let's go to the images, and I can then take questions if you have them. So this is the photograph that often appears in textbooks, and this is Patterson at the front with his horse and the men with their fixed bayonets marching. It's difficult to say where this was, particularly on the route. Next one. This is roughly the route. If we look at the Tower of London here, which is, by the way, still the main barracks of the Royal Fusiliers regiment, they marched up the Minories, past my grandma, hello grandma, and up to Aldgate, and then along here, and making for Mansion House, which is somewhere off here. It's not a very good map. And then on the way back, it's alleged they went down the Houndsditch, but it depends which newspaper you look at. And then they made their way along Whitechapel to Jubilee Street, South Commercial Street, and then back to have their lunch at Camperdown House. Yeah. Now Hackney's just up here. This is a photograph I had never seen, and I've did a lot of research on this. This is a close-up from the Daily Mail of all newspapers. This is the same newspaper that said hurrah for the black shirts in 1939, some of you may remember. But you can see they've got covers on the trigger area of their rifles. This is a sure sign that they were on their way to the front. The weapons would have been covered over at their most sensitive spot. And you can see their bayonets are under rifles there. And this is Patterson. Yeah. And yeah, they look quite splendid, I think. Yep. Here they are outside this was headed, the caption was from the Jewish World newspaper, outside the Mansion House, and they're wheeling round in order to go back to Aldgate. Yep. This is their banner. I'm going to stand over here some minutes. Those of you who know a bit of Hebrew might be able to see. It says here the first Judeans, Hagedut Ha'ivri, the Jewish battalion. Rishon HaYehuda, the first Judeans. And here is the first Judeans written here. This is the image of their badge, the lovely menorah with the Hebrew words Kadima, forward. This banner, there is one like this in the Imperial War Museum. It used to be on show, but they've reorganized so many times, it's probably in storage. And there's another one at the Haganah Museum in Israel. So there were at least two made. Yep. Wow. Here's an actual badge from our collection at our museum, the Hebrew word, Edema. The officers had also one each on their collar, ordinary soldiers on their cap badge, and this replaced the Royal Fusiliers badge and was issued to them at the end of the war. There was controversy about it, but the soldiers insisted, and we have in our collection at the Jewish Military Museum the actual first prototype badge that was made, pressed into a piece of cardboard with a red seal of the War Office on it, and it's the only one of its kind. You can still buy these badges if you're in the market. They'll cost you probably a couple of £100. They're quite rare, but we've got the original prototype that was made so that the War Office could decide exactly what it would be made of and so on. There were brass for the soldiers, bronze for the officers. Yep. Here's David Ben-Gurion as a young man. Ben-Gurion served, first of all, in the Turkish army. The Jews in Israel didn't know what to do because there were the Allies and then there was the enemy, the British enemy. So for a while, he was a cadet officer in Constantinople with Ben-Zvi and other famous Israelis, who later became Israelis. And they all ran off back went to Egypt, and they joined the British Army, and they were put into the Jewish Legion. And what you'll see here is his Star of David badge on his right shoulder. There were three made, three colours. The red was for the British battalion. The blue was for the 39th, the Americans and Canadians mostly. And the 40th, who were refugees from the Ottoman occupation of Israel and were waiting in Alexandria to join the British armies, theirs was mauve. We've got a red and a blue one in our collection. They're very, very rare. Cloth badges anyway from that period are rare because they perish, unlike brass badges. But I've never even seen a mauve one. They're in museums in Israel. Most of them will be in the hands of families in Israel because their grandfathers and great-grandfathers will have kept it from the war. This picture is in the Royal Fusiliers Museum. There's a whole section devoted to the Jewish battalions, and the Royal Fusiliers are very, very proud of their link with the Israeli forces, and they regard them as really fellow soldiers. The link between them is very strong, and I gave this talk to the officers of the Royal Fusiliers at the Tower of London several years ago. Actually, it was in 2014, because it's the 100th anniversary then, beginning of the First World War, and it was quite an occasion. They had all their silver officers' mess out. It was incredible. And then I gave it again to Bethnal Green Museum because they wanted the general public to hear about the link between the Fusiliers and the People's Reassignment. Yep. This is an ID disc of a man called Gladstone, probably originally Goldstone. Many Jews anglicized their names because they wanted to integrate. And you'll see here his number is upside down, 4134, I think it is, and the J for Jewish battalions. And in the British Jewish Book of Honour, you see all their numbers are displayed against their names. They all have the J prefix. They were the only military unit to have a letter prefix, more or less. And here you got the J for Jewish, which each ID just would have had punched onto it. C of E for Christians, or RC for Catholics, and so on. And here RF for Royal Fusiliers. These discs are quite rare from the First World War. In fact, it was only during the First World War that they were issued, and they were made partly with asbestos, because if you were burnt, the disc would survive and they could identify. That was the reason. And this went on into the Second World War too. Okay? All the medals issued to these soldiers, and all the British soldiers and Commonwealth soldiers, were inscribed with the name, rank, number, and measurement on the edge. On the colossal task, there must have been 3 million men and women under arms in the First World War. And every medal, and most of them got 2 or 3 medals, was inscribed. And here you see that this is for Private Maurice Cooper, J596, but also he had another number. They moved around. They sometimes changed their number. And you can see here, J596 Private, and then his name would have been followed. And those are the 2 medals that he got. So that's the War Medal and the Victory Medal. Most soldiers got the 2. Some soldiers who volunteered in 1914 before conscription got the Mons Star, 1415 Star, and that would make the trio. They were the 3 most common First World War, but all of the Zion Mule Corps and the Jewish Legion would have got these. Yep. The Israelis are not very big on medals. They only have 1 main medal, which is the badge.Oz, Medal of Courage, but you get ribbons for campaigns. In the 1970s, it was really when the Israelis were able to settle down and issue medals for campaigns. This design of a ribbon, which is like a British war ribbon, was designed for all those Jews who served in the Shomrim, who were the Ottoman period guards of Jewish towns and villages, because there was a lot of lawlessness in the Ottoman period, and these guys would ride around, and some women, on horses, protecting the Jewish population. And if you served in the Zion Mule Corps or the Jewish Legion, you got this ribbon, or it was given to your descendants, right up until the 48 War of Independence, which was a separate ribbon. And the colours are green for the farmland, yellow for the desert, the Negev, and red for the blood spilt in defending the land. And of course, then there's the Israeli flag. Yeah. This is rather special. The 40th Battalion, who were Jews from Israel itself, as opposed to the 38th, 39th, the government the government in waiting, the Jewish agency, decided to mint a medallion for. And this is what it looks like. And it's very significant. Some of you may be aware of the Judea Capta coins issued by the Romans when the Romans destroyed Israel at the time of First Century. They minted coins to be circulated throughout the Roman Empire to show that the Jews had been defeated by the Romans, and that the nation of Judea, Israel, was wiped off the map. Why? Because there were no press, no radio. The only way of getting the message round was to make a coin. These coins are very rare. There's quite a few of them at the British Museum. And they had a Roman soldier standing over a woman representing the Jewish people, and she was in chains. So the Bezalel School of Art, Bezalel was the artist who designed the Ark of the Covenant. School is named after him from the Bible. They designed this coin as a fight back, if you like. The Roman soldier is his sword pointing down instead of up. He's running away. The woman has broken her chains, symbolizing the Jewish people. And you say here, it says here, Yehuda Yishaper, Judea is free. And around here, on the edge of this, the other side of the coin, Star of David and some very mystical signs. And it says, the Mitnadvim, the volunteers, Ba'am, of the people, and then the date, and Aleph Yud, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. This was given in 1918 only to the 40th Battalion men. It's very rare. You see one, buy it, and I'll buy it from you. We've got one in our collection, which we treasure. It's very unusual, and I doubt that, it's quite small, about the size of the 50p. A lot of them have probably been lost in people's homes, but it's a remarkable and significant item for the Jewish people. Yep. This is a memorial to the Jewish battalion, which used to be at the Duke Street Synagogue, which was bombed in World War II. It was recovered and it disappeared. I thought it had been lost, so did many other people. But in fact, it was all the time at the Royal Fusiliers Museum. Somebody must have picked it up from the bombing and taken it to the tower. And we did have it at the Jewish Museum in Camden for several months during the commemorations for the First World War. But it's actually in the same cabinet with the photograph of Ben Gurion. And it says, as you can see it, and I mean some of it, the colours of the 38th Battalion, the Royal Fusiliers, who fought under the British flag for the redemption of the Holy Land in the Great War, 5674 to 9, 1914 to 18, and then ascent again in Hebrew. Yep. This is a photograph I treasure. I must tell you a little bit about it, even if you're bored. I was invited to go, because of my work at their museum, the Royal Fusiliers have an archive, to a reunion of Royal Fusiliers veterans from World War I and II. This was in 1989. I'm considerably darker of hair, as you can see. And lo and behold, Colonel Pettifer, a lovely man who invited me, said, we may have some Jewish volunteers there from the battalions. You must come and meet me. And there they were. And on the left is Jack Cohen, who was in the 39th Battalion. I couldn't find his number and name in the book of honour, but he had his medals and he's inscribed Jewish Battalion. He was 92 when that was taken. And with him is Barn Shedlowski, who changed his surname to Sharon. He was from Ilford, but was from the East End. And he was J3310, and his son is the one who took the photograph and sent it to me. I'm very, very proud of it. But it's a historical photograph too. I think it's the last time any Jewish veterans of the Jewish battalions went to the reunions. It was the last time. They were the last two. Yeah. Now this is an excerpt from the film, so we can go on. Just go through it. That too, and the next one, and again. Okay, so this is a list I drew up. As you can see, casualties and names were known from the 38th Royal Fusiliers Judeans killed in action in World War I, with their place of burial and their addresses around or adjacent to Hackney. This is so I can link the talk for you to the bit of Hackney history. And here you see, for example, Nathan Alec, who was killed on the 30th of October 1918. He was from Spelman Street, East 1, and he's buried at Ismailia in Egypt. Oh, Krieger. Charles Krieger, killed or died on June the 3rd, 1919, from Victoria Park Road, E9, that's around the corner. He's buried at Marlow Road because he was killed during training at Plymouth. If you go up again, next slide. We've got David Gluck, 17th of November 1918, from Hillside Road, Stanford Hill, buried in Cairo. And then there's Louis Hoppen from Victoria Park Road at St Thomas Square, round the corner from where I do. He's buried at Ramleh in Israel. These are all Commonwealth War Graves cemeteries. And Robert Marks, who anglicised his name, his real name was Pinkas Schriefenstein, probably from Eastern Europe, died on the 28th of August 1918. He was from Mildmay Park, which I think is just about in Hackney. And he's buried at the lovely cemetery on Mount Scopus in Jerusalem with many other Jewish soldiers and, of course, non-Jewish soldiers as well. So just to give you some idea of the link, one of the Star of David patches we have in our collection was obtained from the home of Lieutenant Lieb Nierenstein, who lived in Church Street, Stoke Newington. So he's another Hackney guy whose badge we have got through a dealer. I obtained it through a dealer, but the dealer remembered the home it came from and the woman who sold it to him. because she was moving. She was very elderly. This would have been back in the 1980s. Yeah, next one. And this is just an example of one of the Commonwealth war graves with the Star of David on. I mean, there are thousands of these all over Europe and places all over the world. There's even a Jewish war grave on the Shetland Islands from a Jewish pilot of World War II. His plane crashed nearby and he was buried on the Shetland Islands. It's the only Jewish grave on the Shetlands. So they're all over the world, and this is actually Sergeant Brick, who's buried at Rumley. Yeah. Okay, can you go to the film? Here we are. So here you've got Patterson on his horse. This is the one taken in the East End. See the old Susses. The greatcoat signifies inclement weather. There are the men with their fixed bayonets. Lots of police officers around. I wonder if we can see the old lady telling them that only even her son is Martin. You can see it with the crowd of 3 or 4 or 5 people. It must have been quite an occasion. I did go round the Jewish care homes, or wrote to Jewish care, to see if there were any inmates of the homes that would have remembered this. This was back in the 1990s, when some of them alive may have memories of it, but there was nobody who could recall it. Bringing up the rear is the prescribed ambulance, in case anybody falls out. And here's the band. This may be just outside the tower, leading to march. The film is not in any particular order. Here's Patterson talking to one of his mounted officers. This is outside the Pavilion Theatre with a banner here, and the Mayor of Stepney, with some other people. Patterson was asked to dismount and shake hands with everybody. This is the only known film of the march. Here they are again. The band again. Back to the Pavilion Theatre. The editor of this film should have been shocked. And there is another short film. When this is finished. Awesome. Yes. Now I have to introduce this. Some of you will know about the woman. Have I still got time? Yeah. Mina Ruth Davies Salomon was a Jewish feminist, poet, and suffragette. And she was the first person to translate the Hatikvah, the national anthem of Israel, but then the Zionist anthem, into English so people could read it, understand it. And she wrote also a song for these soldiers. It was called the Judean Marching Song, but it was lost. In 2014, at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, a man rummaging through the archives found the music sheet, and a choir got together and sang it, and that's what I hope you're about to hear now. That's Jabotinsky, who means her face.
Zion, our mother, calling to thy sons, we are coming to thine aid. Spread among the nations, we thy loving ones, we are ready, we are coming unafraid. All along the ages thou was lying waste, we were waiting, we were looking to the goal. Thou wast always calling us to haste, we were hoping and we heard thee in our soul. soil. Only we, thy children, precious in thy sight, we shall prove thee, we shall save thee by our toil. Zion, our mother, now thy sons depart, we are coming while thou watchest there alone. Heart amid the nations, beating with our heart, we are ready, we are coming, we thine own.
Civilian uniform you saw there were new recruits arriving at the depot for the 40th Battalion in 1918. And that's Jabotinsky. Jabotinsky, just let me say, was a Polish Jewish Zionist leader who used to go around the world, working for the re-establishment of Israel. And he went to America, and he made one of the last speeches he ever made. He died quite young of a heart attack. He said, "I'm warning the Jews of Europe to get out. Something terrible is going to happen." And they didn't laugh at him exactly, but he was ignored. And of course, what happened, he was absolutely true. He knew about it. He traveled Eastern Europe a lot. He saw what was coming. Fascism in Italy, fascism in Poland, fascism in Spain, and he warned the Jews to get out, but too little too late. Any questions?
And when did he say that?
In 1940, but he was saying it beforehand. It's one of the last things he said to an American audience. He was there trying to get funds to get people out and so on.
Yes, sorry. One correction is that Marmae Park is in Islington.
So is it?
So, first place I spotted.
Can I say though that in the Book of Honour,
Yeah.
it has also all those who served, and dozens of those men were from Hackney, or they moved to Hackney after the war. They were survivors.
It's very close to that.
Yeah, of course
It's in this.
it justifies me. But
The second thing is I was a bit late in, so I didn't hear the introduction, so I don't know how these particular soldiers came to be in this brigade. Were they conscripted into it, or did they volunteer? And finally...
No. Oh, sorry. I'll let you answer that first. They were volunteers, and many of them came from other regiments. They wanted to go and fight in the Jewish battalion. I mean, when it was announced that they were recruiting it, they all went to their COs and said, "I want to transfer." And most of the officers came from other regiments. They were Anglo-Jewish officers, Patterson obviously, but the 39th Battalion was commanded by Eliezer Margolin, who was an Australian-Canadian, also probably born in Russia. There are different stories told
about it, that it was being fought, and they were passionate to be in that.
Absolutely. I mean,
So-
rushed to join them.
So my great uncle, who was from Sydney Street,
Right.
was one of them. And I was looking, when you talked about the size of them, he was 6'4", right? So I was looking there on the marching, and there were a couple of guys that are high.
Generally speaking, people of that generation were a bit short.
Yes,
They were
they were ungentle giants. Yeah, and he was one of them, and he went out there and fought in it. That's all I know about it. So you've helped me a lot to put stuff to it.
Have you got time for any more questions?
Oh, one more?
One more?
Sorry, any more? How many people were on the march? You probably said it.
About 450
400.
plus the band.
Yeah.
It was half of the battalion. When they went to Southampton, the other half joined them, and they went. By the way, I should have mentioned that they went by ship to Cherbourg, train to Marseille, and then ship to Egypt, and from there they served in Megiddo, Armageddon, where you get the word Armageddon from. They served in the Jordan Valley, where Partridge and Dill, and on the outskirts of Damascus. And one quote from somebody who I know you've all heard of, Lawrence of Arabia, in his book, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, which I've read a number of times, and in the book, The Secret Lives of Lawrence of Arabia, he says, the Jews are a never-ending miracle.
A never-ending
Miracle.
miracle.
He was very complimentary. He marched with Allenby into the old city when Jerusalem was liberated. He was right behind Allenby. Allenby adored him. But people say, you know, he was a champion of the Arab cause, and he was, because of Jordan, Syria, all those countries went to the Arab people. But he was a closet Zionist, Lawrence of Arabia. Why he's not very popular among them.